Ethan Cole had it all: wealth, success, and a marriage he thought was built on love. But when whispers of betrayal reveal a secret twin sister with her own dangerous agenda, his perfect life unravels. How far will Ethan go to uncover the truth before it's too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun shone through the windows of Ethan Cole's penthouse office in downtown Manhattan. At 40 years old, he had everything. Money could buy, but his heart felt empty. Being one of New York's most successful tech entrepreneurs meant everyone wanted something from him. Everyone except her. Naomi Bennett walked into his life on a Tuesday morning. She wasn't supposed to be there. The non-profit organization she worked for had sent her last minute to replace their regular representative at the charity meeting. Ethan noticed right away how different she was from the usual people in his boardroom. "I don't care about the photo opportunities, Mr. Cole," Naomi said, her voice firm but kind. "These children need real help, not just publicity shots for your company's annual report." The other executives in the room gasped, but Ethan couldn't help smiling. For the first time in years, someone was talking to him like a real person. "Call me, Ethan," he said after the meeting, catching up with her by the elevator. "And I'd like to hear more about your ideas over dinner." Naomi hesitated. "I don't date donors, Mr. Cole. It complicates things." "Then I'll withdraw my donation," Ethan joked, making her laugh. "Come on, just dinner. I promise to behave." That dinner changed everything. Naomi told him about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about her passion for helping underprivileged kids, and how she'd worked her way through college. Ethan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his fears of being used for his money, his loneliness, despite his success. "You're nothing like I expected," Naomi admitted as they walked through Central Park after dinner. "I thought you'd be a stuck-up rich guy?" Ethan finished for her, grinning. "Well, yeah," she laughed, "but you're just real." Their romance moved fast, but it felt right. Naomi didn't care about his fancy cars or his mansion in the Hamptons. She preferred simple dates, cooking dinner together, walking in the park, or just talking for hours. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Ethan told her one night, 3 months after they met. They were sitting on his balcony, looking at the city lights. "Marry me, Naomi." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Your world is so different from mine." "You are my world now," Ethan said, pulling out a simple diamond ring. Nothing flashy, because he knew that's not what she'd want. The wedding was small, despite the media's interest in New York's most eligible bachelor getting married. Naomi wore a simple white dress, and they said their vows in the garden of Ethan's Hampton estate, with only close friends present. Life seemed perfect after the wedding. Naomi moved into Ethan's mansion, and though she was uncomfortable with all the luxury at first, she slowly started making it feel like home. She kept working at her non-profit, refusing to let marriage to a millionaire change who she was. But then things started getting strange. It began with little things. One morning, Naomi couldn't remember the conversation they'd had the night before about their weekend plans. A week later, she suddenly hated the pasta dish she'd always loved when they were dating. "Are you feeling okay?" Ethan asked one evening when Naomi seemed cold and distant, nothing like her usual warm self. "I'm fine," she snapped, then immediately softened. "Sorry, just tired from work." But it wasn't just tiredness. Some days, Naomi was the loving, caring woman he'd married. Other days, she felt like a stranger. Ethan tried to tell himself he was imagining things. That marriage just took adjustment. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Ethan came home early one afternoon, hoping to surprise Naomi. As he walked toward their bedroom, he heard her voice, but something was different. It was harder, colder. "Don't worry about it," she was saying. "I've got access to all his accounts now. Just give me time." Ethan froze in the hallway, his heart pounding. This wasn't the voice of the woman he loved. This wasn't his Naomi. He backed away quietly, his mind racing. Had he been wrong about her all along? Was this all an act to get his money? No, he couldn't believe that. The love they shared was real. He'd stake his life on it. But as he sat in his study that night, pretending everything was normal, during dinner, Ethan knew his perfect love story wasn't so perfect anymore. Something was very wrong with his wife, or maybe he was about to discover with his wives. The truth would turn out to be more shocking than anything he could have imagined. His Naomi wasn't lying to him, but her secret was about to tear their world apart. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The phone call he'd overheard kept playing in his mind. He looked at Naomi sleeping peacefully beside him and wondered how the same person could seem so different from one moment to the next. The next morning, Naomi was making breakfast, humming her favorite song and acting completely normal. She wore the apron he'd given her for Christmas and was making the blueberry pancakes he loved. "You seem worried," she said, touching his cheek gently. "Is everything okay at work?" Ethan forced a smile. "Everything's fine, just tired." But things weren't fine. That afternoon, he called his friend and personal investigator, Mike Thompson. "I need you to look into something for me," Ethan said, closing his office door. "It's about Naomi." Mike's voice turned serious. "What's going on, Ethan?" "I don't know. Maybe nothing, but something feels off. Can you check her background again? Dig deeper this time. You sure about this? You were so certain about her." Ethan rubbed his temples. I am certain. That's what's driving me crazy. I know she loves me, Mike, but sometimes it's like she's a different person." Over the next few weeks, Ethan started keeping track of the strange incidents. One day, Naomi talked about growing up on a farm in Ohio. The next week, she mentioned her childhood in the city. She would forget conversations they'd just had, then remember things they'd never discussed. The breaking point came during a charity event at their mansion. Naomi had organized everything perfectly, greeting guests with her usual grace. Then Ethan saw her slip away to make a phone call. He followed her to the garden, staying hidden behind a large oak tree. Naomi's voice carried clearly in the night. "Herr, he doesn't suspect anything," she was saying, "but we need to move faster. His board meeting is next week. That's our chance." Ethan's hands curled into fists. He wanted to confront her right there, but something held him back. This cold, calculating voice. It wasn't the Naomi he knew. His Naomi was warm, genuine, loving. The next day, Mike called with some interesting information. "You need to see this," Mike said, laying out some papers on Ethan's desk. "Naomi Bennett has a twin sister." Ethan stared at the documents. "A twin? That's impossible. She would have told me. Her name is Nevia Bennett. And get this, she has quite a record. Fraud, identity theft, you name it." Ethan's world started spinning. A twin sister. Could it be possible? Was that why Naomi seemed like two different people? He started paying closer attention. He noticed how some days Naomi wore her watch on her left wrist, other days on her right. How sometimes she took her coffee black, other times with cream and sugar. Small details that could mean nothing or everything. Then came the day he found the receipt. It was tucked in a drawer in his home office. A receipt for a meal at an expensive restaurant downtown, dated last Tuesday. But last Tuesday, he and Naomi had been home all evening having dinner together. Or had they? The more he looked, the more he found. Extra sets of clothes in sizes slightly different from Naomi's usual size. Phone calls at odd hours. Money being moved between accounts in ways Naomi had never done before. One evening, he decided to test his theory. He came home early and found Naomi in the kitchen. "Remember our first date?" he asked casually. "That little Italian place." "Of course," she smiled. "The pasta was amazing." Ethan's heart sank. Their first date had been at a French restaurant. His Naomi would never have forgotten that. But if this wasn't his Naomi, who was she? And where was his real wife? The answer came in the most unexpected way. Late one night, he heard noises coming from the guest house, the one Naomi had insisted on renovating shortly after their marriage. He'd never questioned it when she said she needed a space for her charity work. Ethan walked quietly across the dark garden. The guest house windows were dark, but he could hear voices inside. As he got closer, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Two identical voices arguing. "You're taking too many risks," one voice said. "He's going to figure it out." "He suspects nothing," the other voice replied. "And soon it won't matter anyway." Ethan stood frozen outside the window. Two voices. Same voice. His wife's voice. The truth hit him like a physical blow. There weren't two Naomis, there were two sisters, and one of them had been playing a very dangerous game. Ethan backed away from the guest house, his mind racing. Now he knew the truth, or at least part of it. But what was he going to do about it? And more importantly, which sister was really his wife? As he walked back to the main house, one thing became clear. Someone was trying to destroy his marriage and steal his fortune. And the worst part? He couldn't even be sure if his own wife was part of the plan. The next morning, looking at the woman across the breakfast table, Ethan made a decision. He would play along for now, watching and waiting, but he needed to know one thing for certain. Which sister was sitting across from him right now? "Honey," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about taking a trip. Remember that place we talked about on our first date? The one you said you'd always wanted to visit?" He watched her face carefully as she answered. And in that moment, he knew this wasn't his Naomi. The game was on, and Ethan Cole was finally ready to play. Ethan had a plan. Now that he knew about the twin sisters, he started watching more carefully. He noticed things he'd missed before. How the real Naomi always touched her neck when she was nervous, while her sister didn't have this habit. How Nevaeh's laugh was just a little sharper, her eyes a little colder. "I'm going to be working. Late tonight." The woman he now knew was Nevaeh told him over breakfast. She was wearing Naomi's favorite blue dress, but she'd paired it with high heels, something his wife rarely wore around the house. "Of course, honey," Ethan replied, pretending nothing was wrong. "Don't work too hard." As soon as she left, Ethan called Mike. "I need cameras installed in the guest house today." "Already on it," Mike said. "But Ethan, there's more you need to know about Nevaeh Bennett." The files Mike brought over made Ethan's stomach turn. Nevaeh had a history of stealing identities, including trying to take over her college roommate's life. She'd been in and out of trouble since she was 18. "What about Naomi?" Ethan asked. "Any sign that she's involved in this?" Mike shook his head. "From what I can tell, Naomi's been trying to help her sister for years, paying for rehab, giving her money, trying to get her straight. But Nevaeh always went back to her old ways." That afternoon, Ethan got his first real chance to talk to the real Naomi. He came home early and found her in the garden, alone. He could tell it was really her. She was wearing flat shoes, and that nervous hand went to her neck the moment she saw him. "Ethan," she said, startled. "I thought you had meetings all afternoon." "I needed to see you," he said carefully. "The real you." Naomi's face went pale. Her hand flew to her neck again. "What do you mean?" "I know about Nevaeh," Ethan said quietly. Tears filled Naomi's eyes. For a moment she looked like she might run. Then her shoulders slumped and she sat heavily on a garden bench. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Long enough?" Ethan sat beside her but didn't touch her. "Not yet." "Why didn't you tell me you had a twin sister?" Naomi's tears fell freely now. "I was ashamed, never. She's always been troubled. After our parents died, she got worse. Drugs, stealing, lying. I tried so hard to help her. And now she's trying to steal your life," Ethan said. "She showed up the day after our wedding," Naomi confessed. "Said she was clean, that she needed a place to stay. I thought maybe this time she really wanted to change. But instead she started pretending to be you." Naomi nodded miserably. "At first it was just little things. She'd pretend to be me when delivery people came, or when you got home late and were just heading to bed. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. And the phone calls about my bank." "Accounts?" Ethan asked. Naomi's head snapped up, horror on her face. "What phone calls?" Ethan told her everything he'd overheard. With each word, Naomi grew paler. "Oh God," she whispered. "She's planning something big." "Ethan, I swear I didn't." "No, you have to believe me." Looking at her terrified face, Ethan knew she was telling the truth. This was his Naomi, the woman he'd fallen in love with. "I believe you," he said, finally taking her hand. "But now you need to tell me everything." For the next hour, Naomi poured out the whole story. How Nevaeh had always been jealous of her, even as children. How she'd tried to steal Naomi's boyfriends, her jobs, her life. How Naomi had always forgiven her, always tried to help her. "She's my sister," Naomi said softly. My twin. When I look at her, I see who she could have been if things had been different. I just wanted to give her one more chance. And now she's using that chance to try to destroy us, Ethan said. I'll tell her to leave, Naomi said. Right now, I'll make her go. But Ethan had a different idea. No, he said. Let's not tip our hand yet. I want to know exactly what she's planning. Just then, they heard a car in the driveway. Nevaeh was back early. Quick, Ethan whispered. Go to the guest house. Act normal. I'll handle her. Naomi squeezed his hand once, then hurried away. Moments later, Nevaeh walked into the garden, wearing Naomi's face but not her heart. You're home early, she said, trying to kiss him. Ethan turned his head so her lips caught his cheek instead. Just needed some fresh air, lot on my mind. Anything you want to talk about? Nevaeh asked, her voice a perfect imitation of Naomi's concern. Not yet, Ethan said, but soon. That night, lying in bed next to the wrong sister, Ethan made his plans. The board meeting was in 3 days. Whatever Nevaeh was planning, it would happen then. But Ethan Cole hadn't become a millionaire by letting people outsmart him. He'd worked too hard, fought too long to let anyone steal what was his, especially his marriage. As he pretended to sleep, he could hear Nevaeh sneaking out of bed, probably going to meet with Naomi in the guest house. Let her plot and scheme, he thought. She had no idea what was coming, because Ethan had a secret of his own. And in 3 days, both sisters would learn exactly what happened to people who tried to play him for a fool. The game wasn't just on. It was about to change completely. The next morning, Ethan put his plan into motion. He purposely left his laptop open on his desk, showing an email about transferring a large sum of money after the board meeting. He knew Nevaeh would take the bait. Sure enough, when he checked the hidden camera feed Mike had installed, he saw Nevaeh sneaking into his office as soon as he left for work. She spent 20 minutes reading through his emails and taking pictures of his computer screen with her phone. Got you, Ethan whispered, watching the footage on his phone. But catching Nevaeh snooping wasn't enough. He needed to know who she was working with. The phone calls he'd overheard made it clear she had a partner, someone who wanted to take control of his company. That afternoon, he asked his secretary to cancel all his appointments and drove to the guest house. He knew Nevaeh would be at the charity office pretending to be Naomi. This was his chance to talk to his real wife alone. He found Naomi sitting at the small desk in the guest house, looking tired and worried. We need to talk, Ethan said, closing the door behind him. About the board meeting. Naomi's hand went to her neck, that familiar nervous gesture that Nevaeh could never quite copy. What about it? Nevaeh's planning something. I think she's working with someone from my company. Naomi's eyes widened. Last week, I heard her on the phone with someone. A man. She called him James. Ethan felt his blood run cold. James Parker. Yes, that was the name. Do you know him? Ethan sank into a chair. James Parker was his chief financial officer and his biggest rival within the company. For years, James had been trying to gain control of the board. James has been after my company for years, Ethan explained. He must have found out about Nevaeh somehow. They're working together. Oh God, Naomi whispered. Ethan, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't let her stay... Ethan took her hand. Listen to me. This is your fault. Neva made her own choices. Just then they heard a car door slam outside. Nevaeh was back early. Again. Quick, Ethan said. Act natural. Let her think she's still fooling us. Naomi nodded and hurried to look busy with paperwork. Moments later, Nevaeh walked into the guest house. She froze when she saw Ethan. What are you doing here? Just checking on my wife's charity work, Ethan said smoothly. You know how much I love supporting your projects, honey. He watched Nevaeh's face carefully as she tried to remember what charity projects Naomi was working on. Her hesitation was brief, but he caught it. Of course, she said. I was just telling Naomi about our latest fundraiser plans. Ethan smiled, playing along. That's wonderful. Maybe we can discuss it over dinner. I'm taking you both out tonight. Nevaeh and Naomi exchanged quick glances. This wasn't part of their usual routine. Both of us? Nevaeh asked carefully. Of course, Ethan said. After all, family should stick together, right, honey? He watched as both sisters tried to figure out if he was addressing them or not. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. That evening at the restaurant, Ethan sat back and watched the sisters play their parts. To anyone else, they would have looked like a loving family, a husband taking his wife and her twin sister to dinner. But Ethan could see the cracks in their performance. Nevia kept slipping up, forgetting details about Naomi's life that a twin sister should know, and Naomi's hands shook every time she lifted her wine glass, terrified that their secret was about to be exposed. "So, Nevea," Ethan said casually, "how long are you planning to stay with us?" "Oh, not much longer," Nevea replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just until after your board meeting. I wouldn't want to miss all the excitement." Naomi's wine glass crashed to the floor. The red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "Are you okay, sis?" Nevea asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Fine," Naomi whispered, "just clumsy." But Ethan had seen the look that passed between the sisters. Nevia's words had been a threat, and Naomi knew it. Later that night, after they returned home, Ethan made a phone call to Mike. "I need you to look into James Parker," he said. "Everything you can find. And I mean everything." "Already on it," Mike replied. "And Ethan, you need to see this. I found some old photos of the Bennett twins from their high school yearbook. There's something strange about them." "What do you mean?" "In every photo, Nevea is standing in front of Naomi, always slightly blocking her from view. It's like she's been trying to replace her sister her whole life." Ethan looked out his office window at the guest house, where a light still burned. Inside, he knew, two identical women were playing out a lifelong drama of love, jealousy, and betrayal. The board meeting was now just 2 days away. Whatever Nevea and James were planning, it would happen then. But Ethan had his own plans. He'd built his fortune by staying one step ahead of his competitors. Now he needed to stay one step ahead of his own wife, or rather, the woman pretending to be his wife. As he watched, the guest house light went out, plunging the garden into darkness. But Ethan knew the real darkness was yet to come. In 2 days, everything would change, and only one sister would win this dangerous game. The day before the board meeting, Ethan's mansion was like a powder keg waiting to explode. Everyone was playing their part, but underneath, secrets and lies were ready to burst into the open. Mike called early that morning with the information about James Parker. "You're not going to believe this," Mike said. "I found offshore accounts in James's name. He's been stealing from the company for years, but he's covered his tracks well." "Not well enough," Ethan replied, a grim smile on his face. "Send me everything you have." But that wasn't all. Mike had more news, and it was worse than Ethan expected. "There's something else," Mike said. "I found recent transfers from James's accounts to someone named Nevia Martinez. She changed her last name 5 years ago." "Martinez?" Ethan felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible. The Bennett twins grew up in foster care. They never knew their real parents." "That's what Naomi thinks," Mike said. "But Nevia found their birth mother. Maria Martinez was a cleaning lady at the hospital where the twins were born. She helped arrange their adoption, and she's been in contact with Nevia for the past 5 years. Ethan sat back in his chair, stunned. "Does Naomi know?" "No. And here's where it gets really interesting. Maria Martinez used to work for James Parker's family. She was their housekeeper for 20 years. The pieces were starting to fall into place. James must have recognized Naomi when she started dating Ethan. He'd probably done some digging, found Nevia, and come up with this whole scheme. One more thing," Mike added. "Maria Martinez died 6 months ago. She left everything to Nevia, including a letter. I haven't been able to find out what was in it, but whatever it was, it set this whole thing in motion." Ethan thanked Mike and hung up. He needed to tell Naomi the truth about her past, but first, he had to deal with James and Nevia. That afternoon, he called an emergency pre-meeting with his most trusted board members. He didn't tell them everything, just enough, to make sure they'd back him tomorrow when he needed it. When he got home that evening, he found both sisters in the main house. Neva was still playing the role of his wife, while Naomi pretended to be the visiting sister. But tonight something was different. Naomi looked scared. "Can we talk?" she whispered, when Nevaeh went to the kitchen. "In your office." Once they were alone, Naomi's hands were shaking so badly she could barely speak. "Nevaeh's planning something for tomorrow," she said. "Something big. I heard her talking to James on the phone. They're going to try to force you out of the company." "I know," Ethan said gently. "But there's something you need to know too. Something about your past." He told her everything. About Maria Martinez, about her connection to James Parker, about the letter she'd left for Nevaeh. Naomi sank into a chair, her face white as snow. "All these years," she whispered, "I thought we were alone in the world, and Nevaeh knew. She knew we had a mother out there." "She's been playing a long game," Ethan said, "using everyone, James, you, me. But tomorrow it ends." Tears rolled down Naomi's cheeks. "Why didn't she tell me? I'm her twin sister. We shared everything." "Not everything," came a cold voice from the doorway. They both turned to see Nevaeh standing there, her face twisted with anger. "You want to know why I didn't tell you?" Nevaeh spat. "Because you got everything else. The good grades, the college scholarships, the perfect job. Even in foster care, everyone loved Naomi better. Well, tomorrow that all changes." "Nevaeh, please." Naomi stood up, reaching for her sister. "Whatever you're planning, it's not too late to stop." "It's been too late for a long time," Nevaeh said. She pulled out her phone and pressed a button. "James, it's time. Move everything now." Ethan lunged for the phone, but Nevaeh was too quick. She ran from the office, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "Stop her!" Ethan shouted. But by the time they reached the front door, Nevaeh was already in her car, speeding down the driveway. Ethan grabbed his phone and called Mike. "She's on the move. Follow her." Then he turned to Naomi, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Are you okay?" "No," she said quietly. "But I will be. What do we do now?" Ethan took her hand. "Now we get ready for tomorrow. It's going to be the fight of our lives." That night, neither of them slept. They sat in Ethan's office, going over his plan again and again. Mike sent regular updates about Nevaeh's movements. She was at James's house planning their final move. As the sun rose over the Manhattan skyline, Ethan and Naomi got ready for the board meeting. This was it, the end game. "Whatever happens today," Ethan told Naomi as they drove into the city, "remember that I love you. The real you." Naomi squeezed his hand. "I love you too, and I'm done letting my sister destroy the people I love." They pulled up to Ethan's office building just as James Parker's car arrived. And there, stepping out of the passenger side, was Nevaeh, wearing the exact same outfit as Naomi. The final act was about to begin, and nobody knew exactly how it would end. The elevator ride to the top floor of Cole Technologies felt like the longest minute of Ethan's life. Naomi stood beside him, her hand clutched tightly in his. They both knew that somewhere in this building, Nevaeh and James were putting their final plans into action. "Remember," Ethan whispered as the elevator doors opened, "let them make the first move." The boardroom was already full when they walked in. 12 of New York's most powerful business leaders sat around the massive oak table. James Parker was at the far end, looking confident. Too confident. "Ethan," James stood up, smiling like a shark. "Anson, Naomi, or should I say Nevaeh?" A murmur ran through the room. Board members looked back and forth between James and Ethan, confusion clear on their faces. "What's he talking about?" demanded Sarah Chen, one of Ethan's oldest board members. "Oh, this is going to be good," James said. He pressed a button on his phone. The large screen at the end of the room lit up with security camera footage from Ethan's mansion. The footage showed Naomi and Nevaeh switching places, passing each other in hallways, taking turns playing the role of Ethan's wife. It looked damning. "As you can see," James announced, "our dear CEO has been fooled by an elaborate con. His wife has a twin sister, and they've been working together to infiltrate this company." More murmurs from the board. Ethan felt Naomi's hand trembling in his. "But that's not all," James continued. He nodded to his secretary, who started passing out folders. "Inside these folders, you'll find proof that Ethan Cole has been moving company money into private accounts. Accounts controlled by both Naomi and Nevaeh Bennett." The board members opened their folders, gasping at what they saw. "This is a lie," Ethan said calmly. Too calmly, James's smile faltered a little. He'd expected Ethan to explode, to look guilty. "Is it?" came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Nevaeh walk in, wearing the exact same outfit as Naomi. "Tell them the truth, sister dear. Tell them how we planned this together." Naomi stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "The only person telling lies here is you, Nevaeh, you and James." "Such drama," James laughed. "But the evidence is clear. Ethan Cole has been stealing from his own company, using these twin sisters as his accomplices. I move for an immediate vote to remove him as CEO." "I second." "The motion," said Robert Hayes, one of James's closest allies on the board. This was the moment Ethan had been waiting for. He pressed a button on his own phone. The screen changed. Now it showed different security footage. James and Nevaeh meeting in secret, planning their scheme. Then bank records appeared, showing the real money trail. The only person stealing from this company, Ethan announced, is James Parker. For the past 5 years, he's been siphoning money into offshore accounts. When he discovered that my wife had a twin sister, he found Nevaeh and convinced her to help him take over the company. The board members were now looking at their phones, where Mike was sending proof of everything Ethan was saying. "That's ridiculous," James sputtered. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, he can," came a new voice. Everyone turned to see Mike Thompson walking in, followed by 2 FBI agents. "James Parker," one of the agents said, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy." "No." James jumped up, knocking over his chair. "This isn't happening. Nevaeh, tell them about our plan." But Nevaeh wasn't listening. She was staring at her sister, tears running down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Naomi, he promised me everything, money, power, revenge. He told me about our real mother, how she chose you over me, how she wanted to keep you, but not me. The letter she left me, it destroyed me." "What letter?" Naomi asked softly. Ethan stepped forward. "There was no letter, Nevaeh. That was another. One of James's lies. Your mother loved you both equally. She gave you up because she was dying and wanted you to have a better life." Nevaeh's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, sobbing. "He lied to me about everything." As the FBI agents led James away in handcuffs, he was still shouting about revenge and betrayal. The board members sat in shocked silence, trying to process everything they'd seen. "I think," Sarah Chen said finally, "we need a new vote. All in favor of keeping Ethan Cole as CEO." Every hand went up, and she continued, looking at Nevaeh with cold eyes. "I assume we'll be pressing charges against Ms. Bennett as well?" Ethan looked at Naomi, who was kneeling beside her crying sister. He saw the pain in both their faces, twin mirrors of loss and regret. "No," he said firmly. "Nevaeh was manipulated by James. She needs help, not punishment." "Ethan," Nevaeh looked up at him, her face streaked with mascara. "Why would you do that for me, after everything I've done?" "Because you're my sister too," he said simply. "And family takes care of family." As the board members filed out, still buzzing about the morning's events, Ethan watched the Bennett twins holding each other, crying and talking softly. Years of pain and secrets were finally coming out. "What happens now?" Naomi asked him later, as they drove home. "Now we heal," Ethan said. "All of us." But as they pulled into their driveway, none of them knew that this wasn't the end of their story. Because James Parker had one final secret, one that would change everything all over again. The day after the board meeting, the headlines were everywhere. Tech CEO uncovers twin switch scandal. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Bennett twins. Inside, the 3 of them were trying to figure out their new normal. "I can't stay here," Nevaeh said over breakfast. She hadn't slept all night, and her eyes were red from crying. "Not after everything I've done." "Yes, you can," Naomi insisted. "We're going to fix this together." Ethan watched the sisters from across the table. It was still strange seeing them together, knowing all the lies and pain that had brought them to this point. But before he could say anything, his phone rang. It was Mike. "Ethan, you need to get down to the police station right now." Mike's voice was urgent. "James is talking, and what he's saying, it's big." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat across from James Parker in the prison visiting room. James looked different in his orange jumpsuit. Smaller somehow, but his eyes still held that dangerous gleam. "I knew you'd come," James smirked. "Want to know why I really did it?" "Save your lies," Ethan said coldly. "You're going to prison for a long time." "Oh, but this isn't a lie," James leaned forward. "This is about Maria Martinez, the twins' mother, and your father." Ethan felt his blood freeze. "What about my father? Why do you think I chose Nevaeh for this plan? Your father, the great Richard Cole, had an affair with Maria 20 years ago. She was his housekeeper too, not just mine. 9 months later, she had twins." "You're lying," Ethan whispered, but deep down, something clicked into place. His father's sudden interest when he'd started dating Naomi, the way he'd pushed for the marriage. "Ask him yourself," James said, "but you better hurry. The cancer's spreading fast. He doesn't have much time left." Ethan stumbled out of the prison, his world spinning. He called his father's nurse, who confirmed what he hadn't known. Richard Cole was in the final stages of pancreatic cancer, refusing treatment. When he got home, he found Naomi and Nevaeh in the garden. They looked up at his face and knew something was wrong. "What is it?" Naomi asked, reaching for his hand. Ethan told them everything. About Maria Martinez, about his father, about the possibility that they were all connected in ways none of them had known. "That's impossible," Nevaeh said, but her voice shook. "Our father was listed as unknown on our birth certificates." "Because Maria never told him," came a weak voice from behind them. They all turned to see Richard Cole standing there, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since Ethan had last seen him. "Dad?" Ethan stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" "I came to tell the truth," Richard said, "before it's too late." They moved inside to the living room where Richard sank into a chair, his breathing labored. "I loved your mother," he told the twins. "But I was married, successful, with a reputation to protect. When she told me she was pregnant, I paid her to keep quiet. It was the biggest mistake of my life." "So it's true?" Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. "You're our father." Richard nodded slowly. "I've known since the day Ethan brought you home, Naomi. You look just like your mother. I thought by encouraging the marriage I could make up for what I'd done, give you the life you should have had. You knew," Ethan's voice cracked. "All this time you knew Naomi was my sister." "Half-sister," Richard corrected. "And yes, I've spent 20 years trying to find a way to make things right." Nevaeh stood up suddenly, her face twisted with anger. "Make things right? Where were you when we were bouncing between foster homes? Where were you when we had nothing?" "Nevaeh," Richard reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm sorry, I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't change anything," she spat. "You're not our father. You're just another rich man who threw money at his problems and walked away." But as she turned to leave, Richard called out again, his voice weaker now. "Wait!" He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "There's more you need to know about your mother, about why she gave you up. The real story." Naomi took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, a real one this time, written in Maria Martinez's handwriting 20 years ago. As she read it aloud, tears streamed down her face. The truth was finally coming out, but it wasn't what any of them had expected. And somewhere across town in his prison cell, James Parker smiled, because even this wasn't the whole story. He had one more card to play, one that would shake the Cole family to its very foundation. The truth about Maria Martinez's death wasn't what anyone thought, and when that secret came out, no one's life would ever be the same again. Naomi's hands shook as she read Maria's letter aloud in the silent living room. "My dearest daughters, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come out. I never wanted to give you up, but I had no choice. Richard Cole wasn't just your father. He was part of something darker, something I discovered while working in his house. I found documents in his office about illegal experiments at Cole Technologies. They were testing dangerous drugs on people. Without their consent, I threatened to expose everything unless Richard helped me give you girls a better life. But instead of helping, he threatened to destroy me. I had to protect you both. That's why I arranged the adoption. why I made sure you would be separated from the Cole family. But I never stopped watching over you. Every birthday, every Christmas, I was there in the shadows, making sure you were safe, but now they've found me. If anything happens to me, look in the old Martinez family home in Queens. In the basement, behind the water heater, there's a safe. The combination is both your birth dates. Everything you need to know is inside. I love you both so much. Please, forgive me for not being strong enough to fight for you. Love your mother, Maria." The room was silent after Naomi finished reading. Richard Cole's face had gone ash white. "It's not true," he whispered. "Those experiments, I never knew—" "Save it," Nevaeh snapped. "You expect us to believe you didn't know what was happening in your own company?" Ethan stood up, his mind racing. "Mike told me Mom died in a car accident 6 months ago, but what if—" "It wasn't an accident," came a voice from the doorway. They all turned to see Mike standing there holding a file. "I've been digging since James mentioned Maria's death. The brake lines in her car were cut." Naomi let out a sob. Nevaeh wrapped her arms around her sister, their anger at each other forgotten in their shared grief. "We need to get to that house," Ethan said. "Now." But Richard grabbed his arm. "Son, wait. There's something else you need to know about your mother, your real mother." "What about her?" Ethan's voice was cold. "She didn't die in childbirth. Like I told you, she left because she discovered the same things Maria did. She tried to stop the experiments and they made her disappear." Ethan staggered back like he'd been hit. Everything he'd ever believed about his family was a lie. "You let me think she was dead all these years? I was trying to protect you." "No." Ethan's voice shook with rage. "You were trying to protect yourself, just like you did with Maria, just like you've always done." Suddenly, Richard clutched his chest, gasping for air. Within minutes, an ambulance was racing him to the hospital. "Go with him," Ethan told Naomi and Nevaeh. "I'm going to that house in Queens." "We're coming with you," Naomi said firmly. "She was our mother. Whatever's in that safe, we deserve to know." The old Martinez house was in a quiet neighborhood, run down but still standing. The basement was dark and musty, but they found the safe exactly where Maria's letter said it would be. With trembling fingers, Naomi entered the combination. Inside, they found a USB drive, more letters, and dozens of photographs, including one that made them all freeze. It showed Maria with another woman, both of them smiling at the camera. The other woman was holding a baby that could only be Ethan. "That's my mother," Ethan whispered. "With yours." "Look at the back," Nevaeh said, written there in faded ink. "Eleanor and Maria, sisters forever. We'll expose the truth together." "Sisters?" Naomi gasped. "Our mothers were sisters." "Which means—" Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. "We're not half-siblings," Nevaeh said. "Our mothers were sisters, but Richard Cole isn't really our father. It was all a lie." Mike, who had been examining the USB drive on his laptop, suddenly cursed. "You need to see this," he said. "It's security footage from the night Maria died. And look who's there." The grainy video showed a familiar figure tampering with Maria's car. "James Parker." "But why?" Naomi asked. "Why would he kill our mother?" "Because of what's on the rest of this drive," Mike said grimly. "Files proving that Cole Technologies is still running illegal experiments, and James Parker is running the whole program. That's why he wanted control of the company," Ethan realized. "Not for money, but to keep this hidden." Just then, Ethan's phone rang. It was the hospital. "Your father," the doctor said. "He's asking for all of you. He says he needs to tell you something before it's too late." They rushed to the hospital, their minds spinning with questions, but when they arrived they found Richard's room swarming with FBI agents. "What's going on?" Ethan demanded. "Mr. Cole made a full confession," an agent explained. "About the experiments, about Elena and Maria, about everything. And he named names, including some very powerful people." "Is he—" Naomi couldn't finish the question. "He's alive, but barely. The doctor says he has hours at most." They entered the room to find Richard hooked up to machines, his breathing shallow. When he saw them, tears rolled down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I tried to protect you all, but I only made things worse. Elena, your mother, she's alive. They've been keeping her in a facility upstate. The access codes are... His voice trailed off as the machine started beeping frantically. Doctors rushed in, pushing them out of the room, but they had enough information. Somewhere upstate, Elena Cole, Ethan's real mother and the twins' aunt, was waiting to be found. And with her, they might finally learn the whole truth about everything. As they drove through the night toward the coordinates Richard had given them, none of them knew that James Parker had already made a call from prison. Right now, people were racing to reach Elena first. It was going to be a long night, and for some of them it might be their last. The coordinates led them to an abandoned psychiatric facility 3 hours north of the city. Rain pounded against the windshield as Ethan's car sped through the darkness, with Mike following close behind in another vehicle. "Are you sure about this?" Naomi asked from the passenger seat. "It could be a trap." "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "So if my mother's really been alive all these years..." Nevaeh leaned forward from the back seat. "Someone's following us, black SUV, about half a mile back." Mike's voice crackled over their phones. "I see them. 3 cars, professional drivers. Has to be James's people." They pulled up to the facility's gates. The old sign read Pine Grove Wellness Center, but the place looked anything but welcoming. The gates were chained shut. "Now what?" Nevaeh asked. Ethan gunned the engine. "Hold. Hon?" The car crashed through the gates, metal screeching against metal. Behind them, they could hear the SUVs gaining ground. "The main building," Mike said through the phone. "According to the blueprints Richard gave us, there's a secure wing in the basement. That's got to be where they're keeping her." They rushed inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place smelled of mold and decay, with papers scattered across the floor and broken furniture everywhere. "Wait." Naomi grabbed Ethan's arm. "Listen." In the distance they could hear footsteps. Lots of them. James's people had caught up. "Split up," Mike ordered, pulling out his gun. "I'll hold them off. You find Elena." "Mike..." Ethan started to protest. "Go. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they're all over this place." They ran deeper into the building, following the signs to the basement. The stairs were slick with water from leaking pipes, and the air grew colder with each step down. "There." Nevaeh pointed to a heavy steel door with a keypad. "The access codes Richard gave us..." Ethan punched in the numbers with shaking fingers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door clicked open. Inside was a long hallway lined with doors. Most stood open, revealing empty rooms, but at the very end, one door was sealed shut. Gunshots echoed from upstairs. They were running out of time. "Mom!" Ethan called out. "Elena Cole! Here!" A weak voice answered. "I'm in here." They rushed to the door. Through the small window, they could see a woman sitting on a bed. Her hair was grey now, but her eyes, they were exactly like Ethan's. "Stand back," Ethan warned. He and Nevaeh threw their weight against the door, while Naomi entered the code. The door swung open. Elena Cole stood on shaky legs. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, touching Ethan's face. "My boy. My beautiful boy." More gunshots from above, closer now. "We need to go," Nevaeh urged. "Now!" But Elena grabbed her arm. "Wait! The evidence. Everything Maria and I collected, it's hidden in my room." She pulled up a loose floor tile, revealing a metal box. Inside were more files, more USB drives. 20 years of proof, Elena said. Enough to bring down everyone involved. In the experiments. That's why they couldn't let us go. Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. "Give me the box," Naomi said. "You 3 go out the back way. I'll lead them off in another direction." "No." Nevaeh grabbed her sister. "We're not splitting up. Not again." "She's right," Ethan said. "We do this together." They could hear men shouting in the hallway now. Elena clutched the box to her chest. "There's something else you need to know," she said quickly. "About James Parker. He's not just running the experiments. He's your father, Ethan. That's why. He hates the Cole family so much. Richard stole me from him, made everyone think the baby was his." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. James Parker, the man who had tried to destroy him, was his real father. Before he could process this, the door burst open. Armed men poured in, guns raised. "Nobody move!" one shouted. but they hadn't noticed Nevia slip behind the door. In one swift move, she kicked the legs out from under the first man. His gun went off, the shot going wild. Chaos erupted. Ethan tackled another guard while Naomi grabbed the fallen gun. Elena clutched the box of evidence, ducking behind the bed. Then, a familiar voice cut through the mayhem. "Stop, or I put a bullet in Mike's head." Everyone froze. In the doorway stood James Parker himself, holding a gun to Mike's temple. "Hello, son," he sneered at Ethan. "Surprised to see your old man?" "You're not my father," Ethan spat. "A father doesn't try to destroy his son's life." "No?" James laughed. "Tell that to Richard Cole. He's the one who stole my wife, my son, my whole life. Everything I did was to take back what was mine." "You're wrong," Elena said, standing tall despite her years of captivity. "Richard didn't steal me. I chose to leave you when I found out what you were doing to those innocent people. And I'd choose it again." James's face twisted with rage. "Then you can die with your choices." He swung the gun toward Elena. 3 shots rang out in quick succession, but it wasn't Elena who fell. In the chaos, no one had noticed Mike pull out a hidden backup weapon. No one except Nevea, who had positioned herself perfectly for what came next. James Parker looked down in surprise at the red stains spreading across his chest. Then he crumpled to the floor. "Nobody," Mike said coldly, "threatens my friends." The other guards, seeing their leader fall, quickly surrendered. Within minutes, the FBI teams Mike had called earlier swarmed the building. As they walked out into the rain-soaked night, Elena held both Ethan and the twins close. "We have so much to catch up on," she said softly. "So many years to make up for." But Ethan was looking at Naomi, his heart torn. If Elena was their aunt, what did that mean for his marriage? Naomi saw his expression and took his hand. "Hey," she said gently, "nobody chooses their family, but we did choose each other, and I'm not letting anything change that." As ambulances and police cars lit up the night with red and blue flashes, they all held each other close. They had found the truth, but at what cost? And what would they do with it now? Because even with James Parker dead, there were still powerful people who wanted to keep their secrets buried. The fight wasn't over. It was just changing battlefields. 6 months after the night at Pine Grove Wellness Center, the Cole mansion was filled with lights and laughter. It was Thanksgiving, and for the first time the whole family was together. Elena Cole sat at the head of the table, looking healthier and stronger than she had in years. The evidence she and Maria had collected led to dozens of arrests, including several high-ranking executives at Cole Technologies. The illegal experiments were exposed, and the victims' families finally got justice. "More wine, Mum?" Ethan asked, still getting used to saying that word. Elena smiled, holding out her glass. "Just a little. I'm still getting used to freedom." Across the table, Naomi and Nevea were deep in conversation. The past months had been hard for both of them, dealing with the truth about their mother's murder and their family history. But they were healing together. "I start therapy next week," Nevea announced during dinner. "Real therapy this time, not just because I have to." "That's wonderful," Naomi squeezed her sister's hand. After everything that happened, she had convinced the board not to press charges against Nevea. Instead, she was doing community service at Naomi's nonprofit, working with troubled teens. "I have some news too," Elena said, setting down her glass. "The lawyers finally finished sorting out Richard's estate." Richard Cole had died the night they found Elena, but not before signing a full confession and changing his will. He left everything to charity except for one thing, a letter for Ethan. "Have you read it yet?" Mike asked from his end of the table. After helping save their lives, he had become more than just an investigator. He was family. Ethan pulled out the envelope he'd been carrying for weeks. "I think it's time." Everyone fell silent as he read, "Dear Ethan, by the time you read this, you'll know the truth about everything. About James being your biological father, about Elena, about what I did to the Bennett family. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But there's one thing you should know. Even though you weren't my blood, you were always my son in my heart. Everything good I ever did was because of you. You made me want to be better, Even though I failed so many times, the company is yours now. Make it what it should have been. All along, a force for good. And take care of your family, all of them. Love doesn't care about DNA. I learned that too late. Dad. Ethan folded the letter carefully, feeling Naomi's hand slip into his. He was right about one thing, Naomi said softly. Love doesn't care about DNA. They had faced their own struggles with this truth. Finding out they weren't related by blood had been a relief, but it didn't erase the complicated emotions of everything they'd been through. Speaking of love, Eleanor said, smiling at them, have you set a date yet? Ethan and Naomi exchanged glances. After learning the truth about their family ties, they had decided to have another wedding ceremony, one free of lies and secrets. Spring, Naomi answered, and this time my sister is my maid of honor. Nevia looked up in surprise. Really? After everything? Especially after everything, Naomi said firmly. Later that night, after Elena had gone to bed in what used to be the guest house, the four younger people sat in the garden. The same garden where all their secrets had first started unraveling. I got a job offer, Nevia said suddenly, running a youth outreach program in Ohio, where we grew up. Are you going to take it? Ethan asked. I think so. It's time I built my own life instead of trying to steal someone else's. Naomi hugged her sister tight. You'll always have a home here. Both of you, she added, smiling at Mike. Mike cleared his throat. Actually, about that, I've been thinking about opening my own security firm. Cole Technologies could use better protection. They all laughed, but Ethan nodded seriously. Name your price. You're the only one I trust to keep this family safe. As the night grew cooler, they moved inside. Photos lined the walls now. Old pictures of Elena and Maria, new ones of their growing family. In pride of place was a photo from the day they brought Elena home, all of them smiling despite their cuts and bruises. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real, Naomi said, looking at the photos. That we found the truth, that we're all here together. It's real, Ethan pulled her close, and this time no more secrets. But as they headed upstairs to bed, Nevia lingered by the photos. Her hand touched one in particular, Maria with baby twins in her arms, because there was one secret left, one final truth that even Elena didn't know. In Maria's safe house in Queens, hidden behind a loose brick Nevia hadn't told anyone about, there was one more letter, a letter that could change everything again. But that was a story for another day. For now, they were together. They were healing. They were family, and really that was all that mattered. In the morning, Ethan would start the work of rebuilding Cole Technologies. Naomi would continue helping troubled kids find their way. Nevia would pack for Ohio, ready to start her new life. Mike would begin planning their security future, and Elena would finally be free to just be a mother. The mansion that had once held so many secrets now rang with laughter and truth. The gardens where lies had grown now bloomed with love and forgiveness. They had all learned that family isn't about blood or DNA or even shared history. It's about the choices we make, the love we give, and the forgiveness we offer. As the lights went out in the Cole mansion that night, the truth was finally at peace. And if there were more storms coming, well, they would face them together, because that's what families do. Even families built on choices instead of blood. Even families forged in fire and secrets. Even families like theirs. The end.